Attention all airspace sectors, lock down your primary radar screens, calibrate your altimeters to absolute zero tolerance, and clear all commercial traffic from the active runways immediately, because an unidentified financial bogey of unprecedented magnitude has just entered our controlled airspace. Welcome to the Master Flight Control Tower, directors. The high priority alert currently screaming across our transponder monitors is designated XRP suddenly back in focus. Traders watching this level right now, and if you are currently sitting in the passenger cabin, agonizing over a minor patch of turbulence near the $1.34 cruising altitude, you are fundamentally failing to understand the hypersonic velocity of the aircraft you are strapped into. The civilian retail passengers are completely paralyzed by the manufactured aerodynamic drag engineered directly by the legacy market makers. They are staring at the bleeding red instrument panels, watching the spot price bounce erratically between $1.34 and the critical $1.45 resistance ceiling. The amateur pilots are completely misinterpreting this massive coiled consolidation as a sign of permanent engine failure. They feel the agonizing psychological G-force of a heavily manipulated macroeconomic holding pattern, and they are desperately reaching for their parachutes to bail out for absolute pennies on the dollar. But up here in the fortified control tower, our deep space telemetry arrays have just isolated an undeniable massive structural anomaly that proves this aircraft is already being cleared for a vertical supersonic ascent. We are tracking one of the most explosive, highly watched aeronautical patterns in modern technical analysis, a massive inverse head and shoulders formation that has been meticulously building on the daily chart since late February. The global financial routing architecture just triggered a systemic migration protocol, and the master flight plan has deliberately pinned the spot price at the $1.34 support level to execute a massive mid-air refueling operation. The mathematics of this flight path are absolute. Hold the critical support, clear the $1.45 airspace, and the entire altcoin market will witness a violent, uncontrollable 20% vertical surge toward the $1.91 stratosphere. You do not survive the brutal multi-year regulatory turbulence just to unbuckle your seatbelt and jump out of the aircraft mere moments before the sonic boom shatters the sound barrier. The intelligence is definitively verified, the flight paths are entirely secured, and the artificial holding pattern of the legacy banking system is about to violently break. The master flight plan has officially been executed. Keep your eyes locked strictly on the radar. Pivot your offensive radar arrays directly toward the institutional tarmac, because the sheer volume of heavy cargo currently being loaded onto this digital aircraft is completely unprecedented in the history of decentralized aviation. For years, the civilian passenger population has been completely fixated on the daily fluctuations of retail trading volume, completely oblivious to the massive sovereign-grade cargo planes quietly lining up on the adjacent runways. The sudden return to focus that the entire market is currently witnessing is not driven by random retail speculation. It is being violently propelled by the absolute most critical institutional deadline of the entire calendar year. The United States Securities and Exchange Commission is currently sitting on the final approval sequence for the massive XRP spot exchange traded funds, and the entire institutional syndicate is holding its collective breath for the late March ruling. But the smartest money on the planet is absolutely not waiting for the green light to illuminate. Our classified flight manifests confirm that an absolutely staggering $1.44 billion in institutional ETF capital has already flooded the digital tarmac, completely front-running the public announcement. Heavyweight financial aviators like Grayscale, Bitwise, and Franklin Templeton are actively finalizing their flight logs, with Franklin Templeton explicitly slashing their management fees to a hyper-competitive 0.15%, just to aggressively capture the impending tsunami of institutional passengers. According to elite Bloomberg aviation analysts, the statistical probability of a fully cleared institutional flight path this year is hovering at an astonishing 95%. This is the exact reason the market has suddenly snapped back into absolute focus. The legacy banking cartels deliberately utilize the public fear of federal prosecution as a massive psychological anti-aircraft system to artificially suppress the market altitude, forcing weak-handed retail operators to drop their cargo out of sheer terror, while the global elites quietly hoarded the physical supply. Now that the legal cryptographic flight clearances are absolutely undeniably secured, the massive institutional whales no longer have to operate in the stealth shadows of the dark web. They are openly filing their flight plans and preparing for a massive multi-billion-dollar vertical climb. Do not bail out just as the runway lights finally illuminate the path to the absolute pinnacle of the sky. The heavy institutional bombers are completely fueled, and the control tower has officially granted them unrestricted clearance for a maximum thrust vertical ascent. Ensure your tray tables are securely stowed and prepare for immediate ascension. Initiate the deep cover forensic subroutines and cut directly through the massive diversionary tactics actively being deployed by the mainstream corporate security teams, because we must expose the exact internal engine diagnostics that prove this network is actively spooling up for a massive transcontinental flight. The corporate media is deploying heavy acoustic jamming signals, loudly broadcasting the narrative that the recent decline in superficial retail trading activity is a definitive sign of fatal engine failure. They want you to look at the dropping speculative volume and conclude that the aircraft has completely run out of fuel. But let me drop a massive reality check directly into your tactical aviation briefing interface. If you blindly execute the copy and paste flight algorithms fed to you by the very mega corporations actively trying to drain your digital fuel tanks, the system will ruthlessly zero out your altitude and permanently crash your portfolio into the ground. When we completely bypass the noisy public monitors and run a direct diagnostic on the core XRP ledger propulsion system, an entirely different, terrifyingly bullish reality is exposed. The network is not dying. It is actively maturing into a sovereign-grade utility vehicle. We are currently tracking an absolute record-breaking 7.7 million active wallets fully engaged with the ledger infrastructure. Furthermore, the total volume of tokenized real-world assets migrating directly onto this specific flight path has violently surged by 35% in just the last 30 days alone. This is not the behavior of a dying speculative altcoin. This is the undeniable footprint of massive, multinational corporations aggressively hardwiring their cross-border logistics directly into the digital fuselage. The speculative retail tourists who piled in during previous cycles have entirely evacuated the cabin, leaving only the hardened diamond-handed crew members and the massive institutional integrators. The disconnect between the absolute fundamental dominance of the network and the artificially suppressed spot price is the single greatest tension point in the entire financial sector right now. The engines are running at maximum efficiency, processing millions of transactions flawlessly, while the market makers deliberately keep the landing gear deployed to create maximum drag. The smartest institutional pilots are quietly vacuuming up the absolute last remnants of the floating supply, while the amateurs stare at completely dead manipulated radar charts. The internal pressure is building to catastrophic levels, and when that gear finally retracts, the sheer aerodynamic velocity will rip the wings off the legacy fiat system. Expand the operational theater to encompass the entire international logistics grid, because a master flight director understands that securing the local airspace is absolutely useless if you do not possess a flawless, high-velocity propulsion mechanism capable of anchoring the entire global financial system to the new foundational bedrock. We must elevate our perspective and analyze the massive macroeconomic tailwinds currently forcing the United States government to completely reevaluate its entire global flight strategy. For decades, the American dollar has operated as the absolute, undisputed reserve currency of the global skies, utilizing the archaic SWIFT messaging system to force all international traffic through its centralized control towers. But that unipolar dominance is actively dying on the operational runway. Rival sovereign nations are aggressively forming unprecedented financial alliances, desperately attempting to bypass the heavily sanctioned American airspace entirely. In response to this massive, coordinated de-dollarization threat, the highest echelons of the executive branch have realized that they can no longer fight the digital revolution. They must completely co-opt it to survive. The sudden, undeniable regulatory clarity recently granted to XRP by the federal agencies was not a random act of bureaucratic benevolence. It was a highly classified, strategic deployment of American financial power. The government has recognized that the only way to maintain absolute supremacy over the global financial skies is to actively champion a decentralized high-velocity ledger capable of instantly settling massive institutional payloads across all sovereign borders. The recent geopolitical shocks, including the 5-day pause on international strikes that sent massive risk appetite flooding back into the crypto markets, are all interconnected pieces of this massive sovereign chess match. The sudden surge in focus from elite Wall Street analysts is a direct result of this massive geopolitical pivot. The smart money realizes that this specific digital asset is no longer just a speculative token. It is actively being positioned as the absolute foundational settlement layer for the new global economic world order. The digital replacement is fully operational, and the old fiat architecture is being systematically dismantled, line by line. The global payment rails have officially been laid directly into the tarmac, and the massive macroeconomic shift nobody expected is actively rewiring the entire planet as we speak. The global flight plan has been permanently altered. Download the final classified extraction parameters directly into your encrypted navigation modules immediately, because identifying the sovereign manipulation and successfully deciphering the deepest secrets of this aviation information telemetry is entirely useless if you are permanently trapped in the blast zone when the extreme volatility finally strikes. We have empirically proven the massive coiled inverse head and shoulders technical setup, the explosive arrival of $1.4 billion in institutional ETF capital, the absolute record-breaking internal engine diagnostics, and the monumental geopolitical pivot currently redefining the entire global airspace. So how exactly does an elite pilot successfully navigate this unprecedented level of macroeconomic turbulence without completely crashing their portfolio into the side of a mountain? The absolute greatest threat to your financial survival right now is not the Securities and Exchange Commission, and it is certainly not the legacy market makers. It is your own psychological vulnerability to the manufactured boredom trap. The institutions are deliberately flying the aircraft in agonizingly slow, entirely flat circles, specifically designed to induce maximum psychological fatigue. They want you to stare at the altimeter, become utterly convinced that the aircraft is never going to ascend, and voluntarily pull the ejection handle out of sheer, unadulterated frustration. You must cultivate a mindset of absolute, unbreakable steel. Do not allow the temporary, engineered stagnation between the $1.34 floor and the $1.45 ceiling to break your ironclad conviction. When the breakout finally occurs, the vertical velocity will be so violently rapid that anyone who stepped off the plane will be permanently left on the runway, completely unable to chase the ascending rocket. Your ultimate survival protocol dictates that you completely ignore the daily, microscopic fluctuations on the radar screen and focus entirely on the massive, multi-year macroeconomic destination. Secure your private cryptographic keys completely offline in heavily fortified hardware storage, entirely out of the reach of centralized exchange vulnerabilities. Trust the absolute, undeniable on-chain telemetry over the noisy, panic-inducing chatter of the civilian passengers. The fundamental mathematics of this network are mathematically flawless, the institutional cargo is fully loaded, and the control tower has officially initiated the final countdown sequence. Maintain absolute radio silence, brace for extreme positive G-forces, and prepare for the greatest financial ascent in the history of modern aviation.